Also, we are working in a couple of demo sites today. So of course, they are not going to be configured exactly as you would have your online intake configured. This will just be, of course, an example process. And if you do have any questions after the webinar is over today, or you'd like to talk more about the option of creating an online intake site with us, you can always email us at support@legalserver.org. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into talking about online intake with LegalServer. The first thing to note is that this is an additional module with an additional one-time cost of $5,000, which does include the electronic transfer module as well, which is used with online intake. And there is also an additional option, which is adding additional language support, and that's $2,500 per language. So if you wanted your online intake site to be available in English, Spanish, and Creole, for example, that would be an extra $5,000 for the 2 extra languages. So the purpose of the online intake site is to allow an organization to provide an online application process to the public. So it allows you to create a process that is going to be public-facing. Now, the online intake site is hosted by a separate LegalServer site. So it's going to be a completely different site, a different URL from your regular LegalServer site. And the separate LegalServer site for your online intake will transfer the applications that are done to your existing LegalServer site via that electronic case transfer module. The reasons for having a separate instance of LegalServer to host your online intake are, number one, security. So unlike regular LegalServer intakes that require a username and password to log into your regular site, online applications are intentionally exposed to the public or whoever you decide to give that link to, the direct link, and they accept data from anyone. So if there's a problem with an online intake site operation or security, it's not going to affect the operation of your regular instance. And it greatly reduces any security implications for your regular site. The second reason is for conflict data separation. So online application data is not stored in the organization's regular database unless a staff person expressly begins an intake on a pending electronic case transfer. So we're going to actually see this in practice a little bit later on in the webinar. But essentially, until a staff person on your regular site decides that an application should move forward and become part of your database, that will not happen. So essentially, an online applicant cannot intentionally or otherwise create a potential conflict for your organization simply just by filling out and submitting an online application. And the last reason for having a separate site is the ability of creating a state or regional online intake. So some programs can create online intakes that are designed to transfer to multiple organizations using LegalServer based on the information that the applicant enters. So this can be based on criteria such as county of residence, legal problem code, etc. Now with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the setup of online intakes. So again, you'll have a separate LegalServer site. So in this case, our site is just called demo-oi-demo.legalserver.org. And this is typically what a homepage on an online intake site will look like. So you've got 2 important links here. You've got one to start an online application. That's going to be your direct link, which actually launches you into the end user view of the online intake. So what your applicants or potential applicants will see. And then we also have a link to the back end of the online intake process. And this is where you'll be doing all of your configuration and setup of the process itself and all of the steps that someone will have to walk through during the online intake. Also available to put on your homepage are embedded reports. So we've got 2 examples of that. So we have online intakes by month for the current year, and online intakes for the current month. So these, again, will show you any online intakes that are going to be pulled into those reports, and these reports can pull in whatever information that you'd like. With your online intake site, we will provide a basic process, and it's essentially going to be the same as the online intake process that we walk through together today. So we start you out with a basic process that you can configure further from there. We also do provide help configuring the process, which is billable at our regular hourly rate. And you can talk to us about buying a block of hours to help you configure as well. The online intake, just to mention, can also be set up to accept XML data from an agency's existing system, or A2J, from the Energy file. This is an extra setup with an extra cost, and it's determined on a project-by-project basis. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the back end of our process here. So the main thing to mention about configuring an online intake is that it's very similar configuration-wise to a regular process and forms. So just like on your regular site, we've got a process here. It's going to look exactly the same, except for this section here. So here's where we're setting external access. You've got your embedded link. So this is what you can put on your outside website or however you want to share that link with potential applicants. And you've got options for a logo and things like that. And we happen to have our Christmas logo out here still. As we scroll down, we can then see the enabled forms, which are going to be the steps of the online intake, just like in a regular intake on your regular site. Now, one difference as far as configuration goes is that we're able to rename the steps of the online intake itself. So what I mean by that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the front end to show you that, is we have what we call subsections, which are these top sections at the top here, so 1 through 7. And then each form is going to show in your sidebar on the left. So right now, our first subsection is Start, and our first form is also named Start. On the back end, that's going to look like this. So the actual form itself is actually called OI Landing Page, but we've given it a title of Start because, of course, we want that to show as the step name in the online intake. And we've also started a section with this first form. So we're showing it in the sidebar, we've got a subsection, we've got that title as well, and then of course we have our actual step name as well. Another difference as far as configuration goes of our online intake is that we have several special blocks that should be used in online intakes. Some examples of those blocks, one is the opposing parties block. So if we look at our opposing parties form, we can see that we've got a special block on here called Online Intake Opposing Parties. And the big difference here is that it's not going to show you the conflict check results. So of course, those things would not make sense to an applicant filling out an online intake. So it's going to be more of a user-friendly and end-user client-friendly version of the adverse party block. Now, all of these various blocks, including this one, will transfer to the regular site into those regular blocks. So if we input an opposing party or adverse party with this online intake opposing parties block, that information, that data, will transfer to our regular adverse party block in our regular site once that transfer happens. Another example of a special block is the financial information block. So we've got a special online intake financial information block, which will not give you, certain things like the eligibility, the ability to override eligibility. Again, things that you would not want an applicant to see or be able to edit. And the last one that I'll mention directly is the legal problem code online intake block. And what this will do is, and we'll see it when we go through, this will allow you to use the legal problem code descriptive values. So instead of, having your applicant have to choose from the legal problem code, wording that you use on your regular site, something like 32 divorce/separation, you can have user-friendly terms in there, and they'll connect to your actual legal problem codes. And again, we'll see that in a little bit. A couple of other blocks just to mention are, one is the lock steps block. This is typically put on your review page if you have one. So if you want the applicant to be able to review their information, typically you'd have the lock steps block on there. So once they submit that page, they can no longer edit any information. They can't go back in the process, which also allows you to prevent double submission. We also, of course, have a transfer block. So that's where you're going to set up where you want the applications to transfer to. Again, that could be your one regular site, or if this were a regional or statewide online intake, you can transfer to multiple different sites, just depending on that criteria that you set up about who should get those transfers. We also have a block called Submit Configurable, which is going to allow you to bring an applicant to another form, so to an exit form, things like that, or to an outside URL. So if at the end of intake you want to direct them, for instance, to your outside websites, some programs will direct applicants to a page on their website that has more information and resources, or information about setting up an appointment, things like that. And lastly, we've got a special block called Process Language. That is only relevant if you plan to purchase any of the additional language functionality. If you do, that is the block that's typically on the first page of intake, where the applicant is going to choose their preferred language. And then from there, the rest of the intake will be displayed with that language. So that is essentially all of our background information and information about the setup and configuration of our online intake. So we're going to go ahead and actually go through an online intake from the front end. We're going to see what an applicant would see, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the actual transfer piece. So with that, we're going to start again from our online intake here, from the applicant-facing part. Again, this is just a basic example. So you can include essentially any fields, blocks, instructions, things like that that you would want to ask of your potential applicants. The introduction here, again, just an example, some things that you might want to have as far as information to start out with. So we're going to say agree and be able to continue. And you'll notice we're walking through our steps at the top, and we're also being able to see our form or step name on the sidebar here. And I'm going to go ahead and enter an online intake for my own name, so we'll be able to easily distinguish that from our list. You also get to choose what you have required in your online intake. So it's going to be up to you as far as what you want to require for applicants to enter and what should be optional. The address block is going to have the same functionality that you'll see in your regular site in your address block. So if I start to enter a zip code, it's going to give me some potential options. And once I choose one, it's going to fill in my city and county of residence for me. And then, of course, I can enter my street address. We can enter things such as the phone number for the applicant. Again, you could require these things if you needed that information to be able to contact them. Same goes with email address. We can have whatever demographics fields we want here. Here's where we can see the front end of that opposing parties block. So again, it's a much more simplified block than our regular adverse party block. We essentially just have to choose the party type, either an individual or organization/business. And then we get the option to enter the name. We can also add additional just with this plus sign if needed. So I could also add business, organization, opposing party if needed. And with that one, we have a type drop down as well. Anytime you see a drop down throughout, that's going to be what we call a lookup. So those values within that drop down are configurable, just like on your regular site. We now have our online intake financial information block. So again, if you've seen a regular financial block in your regular site, this is a much more simple version. But here we're choosing our income source, the frequency that we get that income, and the amount. And it's going to calculate our monthly income for us. And we can also add additional types as well. Another thing to mention is that you can add defaults in here during configuration. So if you want the applicant to be prompted to enter employment, child support, unemployment, what other types you want to basically note that they should be considering, you can do that as well. You can also configure this to capture assets and expenses if you want to. And our next page in this example online intake is going to be the problem description page. So we have two different options here. And of course, you could incorporate both if you wanted to. The first option is going to be using the online intake legal problem code block that I described earlier. And the second is, of course, just an open-ended text box. With the problem code description option, what you're going to see in the drop-down to start with are any legal problem categories that you've set up. So in this case, we've got housing. Then we're going to see any legal problem codes that we've connected to our housing category. So in this case, I've set up foreclosure and landlord-tenant just as examples. And again, these are going to connect to your regular legal problem code values. So I believe landlord-tenant is legal problem code 69, one of the 60s for sure. And then foreclosure, of course, is another one. So these would, again, transfer to your regular site with your regular legal problem code values. But here we have a more user-friendly terminology. We also have the option to have special legal problem codes, so we can drill down even further. I did not set any up for foreclosure, so we don't get anything extra. But for landlord-tenant, we then get the options of problem with roommates or repairs. So we can be even more specific with our legal problem here. We can also have questions set up specific to the problem that an applicant chooses. So just like our case questions in our regular sites, if there were specific questions about landlord-tenant cases that we want to capture during the online intake, we can have those configured here. So if I choose landlord-tenant, I get those extra questions. If I would have chosen family as my category and divorce as my problem code, I might get different questions that would only be relevant for that type of case. You can set all of that up as well. And then for this particular example, that is essentially the end of the application. So we filled in all of the information that we're going to ask. And this next step, which is optional, is going to show you a review of your application. So this can be set up in a number of different ways. We could be showing all of the information right on the screen. In this particular example, we've got some links. So if I click financial, it's going to load the financial information. If I click demographics, it's going to show me some of that demographic information, etc. And here again is typically where you would have the lock steps block. So once I click success, and you'll notice we can rename these buttons anything we want. So sometimes they'll be exit, sometimes they'll just be continue. In this case, we have it labeled as success. So once I click that, I won't be able to go backwards in the process. Oh. And sorry about that. I was just working with this a bit ago, but let me check something really quick there. So what this should be doing, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. So once you click success or continue, whatever you label that button, typically you're then brought to essentially an exit end page. So in this case, we're just getting our message, which is configurable, that your application has been submitted. In this case, it says we'll contact you within X days to let you know if we can help or need additional information. We also just have a note on here that this page can be used for displaying additional resources or other information. You can include links to your website or to outside websites of resources, etc. And what will actually happen with this online intake is not only, of course, will we be able to keep track of that on our online intake site itself. So we can see in our list view here, it's going to appear as online intakes for our current month, of course. And we can see here that the e-transfer has been initiated. So it's been sent over to our regular site and awaiting response because, of course, we haven't done anything with it yet. We can also see in this list view that one of those has been initiated. So that was my test from earlier that I started an intake for. So you can see all of that information on the online intake site itself. And then if we go over to our regular site, which this is again just one of our demo sites, but this is the one configured to receive online intakes from that site. What will happen is on your cases tab, you'll have an extra tab. In this case, it's called pending transfers. This could be named online intakes or online intake applications, whatever you decide. And here again, we'll be able to see any pending online applications. So if they're awaiting response, we haven't done anything with them yet, or if they're still in the intake stage. Now what will happen from here is if I am someone responsible for picking up these new online intake applications, reviewing them, and possibly starting intakes for them, what I'm going to do when I come to this list is I'm going to click on the case ID, and that will bring us to our pending transfer profile. So here we can see some basic information. What you actually show here and what you actually have transfer over is configurable. So you can hide certain things here if you need to. As far as adding to this page, this is not a dynamic profile. So you do have the ability to add, but it would be additional development that we'd have to work through. But here again, we have basic information. You can do a conflict search on your applicant name. So we can conflict search it against the rest of the cases that we have in our site. Again, this particular person's information is not going to be added to your conflict database until we start an intake for them. So if we just leave it pending or we decide to reject this person, they would never become part of our database, but we can still conflict search them against the rest of your database. You may not have seen that pop up because of our Zoom settings, but essentially when I click on conflict search, it's going to give me a pop-up and show me those conflict search results, just like you would see during a regular intake or on a pre-screen if you're using that process. As I scroll down, again, all of this information would be filled in if I had entered it. We can see our date of birth, things like that, our problem code and special code. Here you can see, I was wrong about our problem code. We've got problem code 63 is private landlord tenant. So we can see that's transferred as our regular legal problem code value, even though we use the descriptive value to enter that during the application. We can see the adverse party information so that we can conflict search these people or organizations as well. We also have the option to enter a note and save that. So if we have some notes about this online application, but we aren't quite sure if we need to reject the person or want to begin the intake, we can enter a note and choose our save note as our action. In our action, you'll also see, of course, reject this case. So again, if we have a conflict for this person, or we see some other criteria that means they're not eligible for services, you can reject them right from here. And again, they will not become part of your conflict database. But what we're going to do is go ahead and begin the intake. So this is what we would do if this applicant seems like they would be eligible for our services. Now, what will happen then is LegalServer is going to walk you through your intake process. Now, this could be your regular intake that you use to intake all clients on your regular site, or you can set up a specific intake on your regular site for online intake transfers. So most programs like to walk through their entire intake. Again, a lot of this information will be filled in already, anything that you entered during the online application. But you do have the option to have an abbreviated intake to go through, or just a different intake if you want to ask different questions if someone came to you from the online intake. So that is entirely up to you. Now, once you complete this intake, we're not going to go through the whole thing here, but once you go through all of your steps of the intake, you will have a case created in your regular site, and that will be a part of your conflict checking, just like any other case that you started from an intake on your regular site. And then the last thing to mention, just because I forgot to mention earlier, is just to specify that you can also have essentially eligibility branch logic within your online intake. So some programs doing online intakes have chosen to put specific eligibility questions within the online intake, and they can use those to route someone throughout the online intake. So if someone enters their financial information and the site determines that their percentage of poverty is at 300%, we can use what we call the conditional branch logic block within the online intake to say, if you're over 125%, be routed to this exit page that explains that you're over income, we cannot help you. If you have any questions, call this number. Same goes with any eligibility criteria or those initial questions. If you ask someone if they have an attorney already for this problem, and that would, keep them from being your clients, you can, of course, have branch logic for that as well. So if they say yes, again, they're routed to an exit page that maybe explains why you can't help someone that already has an attorney, things like that. So all of that can be incorporated into your online intake. If you do that work to incorporate some of those things, then you're less likely to get non-eligible applications coming into your regular site. So it's up to you how specific you want to be with that. Some programs like to keep it a little bit more open so that they can see people coming in through applications and not route anyone away until they've had a chance for a staff person to actually look at the information. But again, that's going to be entirely up to you as far as how you want to do that. If anyone is planning to do a state or regional online intake, you can also have all of that criteria determine where that case is going to be transferred to. So if a case is part of a specific county and in a specific problem category, it might get routed to site X. If it's a different problem category, it might be routed to site Y. So all of that is configurable as well. And I believe that I have now covered everything that I wanted to make sure to touch on. I don't see any pending questions in the queue, but we'll just wait a couple of minutes together here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in now. So we've got a question. Can you send your applicants to lawhelp.org if they are out of state and not eligible for your program service area? Absolutely. So if you ask for the full address or just the state, however you want to do that, if your applicants, provide an address that's out of state or choose out of state as their value, you can, based on branch logic, route them out to an outside website with that submit configurable block. So yes, you can absolutely do that. And a question, if a case is rejected, is there a process for notifying the applicant? You could use apologies. Let me just think through that one for a second. So no, there is no specific kind of tool to use at this point as far as notifying someone that they've been rejected. You would just have to use whatever contact information they've provided, whether that be the email address or the phone number. All of that contact information will appear on the pending transfer profile, but you would have to make that contact outside of LegalServer. So because we're not including them in our database, we don't have the options for directly emailing them from LegalServer, but you will have that contact information right there on your screen. So then you could contact them in whatever way you have information for. Question, every intake gets a case number no matter if it will be accepted or rejected. That is correct. So when a case is created on our online intake site, it's going to get a Matter case ID, and then that will come over into your regular site. So we can see that, for instance, on our pending transfer list view here. So we can see our identification number, and then if it gets created, it will be part of your database. Of course, if it gets rejected, it will be not included in your database, but you'd still be able to report on and see rejected online intakes on the online intake site. So yes, they will have a case number that is going to be able to be referenced. And just to expand a little bit on the question about notifying the applicant, one thing to note that if the case is rejected during the online intake, you can of course display, and by rejected I just mean you're going to ask them to exit essentially and not complete the online intake. You can have whatever wording you want throughout on your exit pages. You also have a block called the send email block, which can be placed throughout the intake. Typically it's at the end of intake, and that can automatically send an email to the client or applicant rather. And that's of course if you gather their email address, if you get that from them. And that can be used to just send an email to thank them again for going through the online intake if it was successful. Again, you could put it on exit pages so they get an email afterward saying, even though we couldn't help you or provide services, here's some more resources or some links, things like that also. All right, so we haven't gotten any new questions in a couple of minutes here, so we'll go ahead and wrap up our session for today. Again, if you do have any questions, we do have a great help site page, help.legalserver.org, that explains essentially everything we talked through today about the online intake. You can always email us at support@legalserver.org, again, with any questions or requests to get an online intake site. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope this was helpful, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.